Okay. In this lecture, we are going to answer some of the questions on Karl Marx and his thought. And in this way, we can just recall some of our knowledge about him. As I'm expecting, you must have read the presentation carefully and listened to my recorded lecture about him also. And so now we are going to see the questions and refer to the answers from the presentation itself. Let me get the questions firstly. Is it now clear, the questions here on the screen?
Doctor.
Students who are attending, please reply.
أيوة يا دكتور واضح.
Do you see the questions?
يا دكتور.
Okay. The first question is about Marcus. It is said that Marcus benefited from Ricardo's theory of value, yet for sure Marcus' theory of value was quite different for more than one reason. Explain. So here we have to make a comparison between Marcus' theory of value and Ricardo's theory of value. Ricardo's theory of value is dependent on labor. It is labor. It is labor which is counted to find out the value of the commodity. But Ricardo, as we know in our previous study, had divided the labor into direct labor and indirect labor. He followed Adam Smith, in considering that the labor is the factor by which the value of the commodity is measured. But as we know, that Smith admitted that capital and land are sharing in the production beside labor, but he estimated the share of the capitalists and landowners in production by referring to units of labor. Ricardo took the approach of dividing the value into direct labor and indirect labor, and referring to indirect labor as the value of other factors of production. Other factors of production which are shared in the production of the commodity. Karl Marx took this idea of David Ricardo, and from his ideological point of view, that the labor is the only factor which is producing, it is the only productive factor. Does this mean that capital is not a productive factor? It is a productive factor. But Karl Marx believed that capital was produced historically by the working class. It is workers who produce the capital. So capital, in fact, which is in the hands of the capitalists, is the property. Notice now this word. It is the property of the working class. It is not merely a measuring of the contribution of capital in production, as Adam Smith thought or Ricardo thought. It's not only that. Adam Smith was talking about capital sharing in the production of the commodity and calculating the share of this capital by dividing the amount taken by the capitalists by the unit of labor. Similarly with landowners, this is the theory of command of labor. Ricardo, when he came to this point, instead of talking about command of labor, he just directly referred to direct and indirect labor, meaning by indirect labor, the share of other factors of production. He did not mean anything about the right of the working class in this capital, as Karl Marx did after that. Karl Marx was talking about capital sharing in the production of the commodity as the property of the working class. The property of the working class, because he said that labor is the only productive factor, and whatever capital is there in the hands of the capitalists, I am repeating this again, whatever capital in the hands of the capitalists is the property of the working class. He gave a simple example. In his Capital, the main contribution of Karl Marx came in his work called Capital, in German language Das Kapital. It was published in 3 volumes. Later on was published in one big volume. But in this Marxian thought, he gave an example of how capital was the product of the working class. He gave an example of a man taking the risk of having few workers. He is paying wages to them, okay? But he is taking them to a coal mine, mangam fahm, a coal mine, asking them to dig, to extract the coal, okay? And then after extracting the coal, he is selling this coal in the market. Now, who has got the coal outside? Who extracted the coal? It is the workers. Nothing more than the workers with their simple tools which they own. خد بالك ده النظام القديم إن labor was having its own tools before the capitalist system in which the machineries were doing the main job in production. Manual work was only limited to stand beside machines, okay, and run the machines and so on, but no more manual work producing by itself. So Karl Marx to a very early period in production where the labor was doing everything with own tools. Okay? And then he said that man who took the workers and gave them wages will take the surplus, I mean the difference between the price of coal, the output which he got from the mine, and the wages which he paid, the difference between the value of output and wages, he took it for himself, while all the product was done by the efforts of these workers. So it was the workers who did the job, but that man stole part of their efforts. Okay? I'm just giving a detailed explanation now to understand how Karl Marx ideologically transferred the concept of capital sharing in the production of the commodity to the new concept which he believed in, that the capital is the property of the working class. The man who employed the workers, produced the coal, did nothing, just paying them wages out of the value of output which he got. Of course, this concept was criticized after that, because this man, in fact, which is the capitalist, as he called him, this man is not only a capitalist, he is an organizer of this operation. He is taking the risk. He is taking the risk of getting the coal out of the mine. Suppose that he did not find the coal in the mine. He had to pay wages to workers still. This is the risk. Suppose that he got coal out of the mine, but he could not sell it in the market. He still had to pay the wages to the workers. This is what Kantian called the entrepreneur, and what Joseph Schumpeter later on said, that this entrepreneur deserves to take part of the output. Okay? But Karl Marx believed that all the surplus value, which is the difference between the value of output and whatever given to the labor, is stolen from the workers. So all capital, machineries or equipment or else, which accumulated over the time, over the years, was the property of the working class. That's the opinion of Karl Marx. This is his concept. Now, back to our question, because we have to give a brief answer. I'm just explaining these because you may not have got this knowledge before or heard it from me before. So the brief answer is that Ricardo's theory of value is labor theory of value, measuring the value of the commodity by the amount of direct labor plus the amount of indirect labor. And all is measured by units of labor. Now, Karl Marx said that this indirect labor is the property of the working class. It is stored labor. So the capital, which is Ricardo talking about it as indirect labor, in Karl Marx's expression is stored labor. So there is direct labor and stored labor. That was the first point, which you have to express briefly now if you are answering this question. Now, the second point in Karl Marx's theory, which really is representing an advance, a real advance over the classical theory. Notice that Karl Marx, as we have said in slides, Karl Marx was influenced by Adam Smith and Ricardo, but he was not one of their school. He was not one of their school. He refused their concepts and started his own thought. So the second point, let us take it from the slides itself, in order to show you the point on slides. Now I'm reviewing now the slides of Karl Marx. Do you see now the slides of Karl Marx? I'm going to come to the value in order to show you the answer of this question. Now this is labor theory of value. If you don't see the slide, please tell me. David Ricardo asserted that the value of any commodity is made up of direct and indirect labor. This is the first point. Karl Marx primarily accepted the Ricardian labor theory of value, but it inserted his own thought by claiming the value of indirect or stored labor is not merely measuring the contribution of capital in production, but in fact is expressing the value of labor which the laborers deserves because it has been stolen from them. Number two, the value of the commodity as measured by labor should be built upon the socially necessary labor. Now, this is the second point, second main point of difference between Karl Marx and Ricardo. Socially necessary labor. Now, assume that there are three producers producing the same commodity X. The cost of the commodity when producer A made, say, 10 units of labor. Producer B costing the same commodity 8 units of labor. Producer C costs the commodity 11 units of labor. Now there is difference in costs, although the three of them are producing the same commodity X. But one of them is producing it by 8 units only, second by 10 units, the third by 11 units. Now, when they go to the market, it is the one who is producing the commodity by 8 units only is the one who is most capable of competing them. Karl Marx talked about the minimum amount of labor which is needed to produce a commodity in the society, called this socially necessary labor. This is very important contribution because it indicates that the most productive producer is the one who is going to be the most capable of competition with the other. Resources should be allocated according to productivity. This is what we have come to know later on. So, socially necessary labor indicates the amount of labor which should be devoted to the commodity in all the society. In Karl Marx analysis, producers are competing with each other. The one who is going to survive is the one who is producing the commodity with the socially necessary labor, i.e., the minimum amount of labor needed to produce such a commodity. Number 3 of the difference between Marx and Ricardo. While the value of one unit of labor is based on subsistence wage, but skilled labor would deserve a higher wage. A greater labor skill will be given higher wage because a greater amount of labor should have been done to obtain the greater skill. In other words, the value of the labor service as any commodity should be estimated by labor done to produce it. Some of you may have read that, but they have to listen to my recorded lecture and listen again to my answer. It means, this point in particular means that Karl Marx used the labor theory to estimate the value of the labor unit. To estimate the value of the labor unit. The labor unit which is used to estimate the value of the commodity. Now we are estimating a commodity, say, by 8 units of labor. Which unit of labor? The classical economists talked about subsistence level, subsistence wage level to measure the unit of labor. But Karl Marx observed, as Smith, that there may be different skills. And Smith said that under some conditions, we have to give the more skilled labor a higher wage than the subsistence wage. But this is at the macro level. At the macro level, all classical economists said that it would be the subsistence wage level. But let me explain it more clearly. You have spent now, say, 20 years in education, or 18 years in education. Suppose that you go to school at 4 years or 5 years, and now your age is 25 or 24. Now you have spent years in education. This years in education is labor. You have done an effort. This effort is labor. And now when you go to the market and work, you deserve to take a higher wage than somebody who has not got any years of education, or has only got 2 or 3 years of education. It means that the value of any unit of labor is also measured by labor. People who spend more time in education or in training are having now more skill and deserve a higher wage rate. So Karl Marx applied the labor theory of value not only, listen carefully, not only in estimating the value of any single commodity, but also in estimating the value of the labor unit itself. Okay? So the labor theory of value now would be reflected on surplus value. But let us take the second question again. The second question says Marx followed the classicists in their late theory of value, but he elaborated and extended such a theory more than them. This question is about the same thing which we have just explained to you. Marcus followed the classicists, Smith and Ricardo, in their labor theory of value, but he elaborated and extended such a theory more than them. Same question like before. So when you get question in different words, don't be puzzled. You may get the same question in different words, but you have to know the core of the question. What is it about? Now, again, this question is about the theory of value of Marcus in comparison to previous scholars who are not of the same school. Marcus has formed his own school. Own school was established by followers of Marcus after that. On the top of them, Lenin, who was one of the leaders in Russia after the Bolshevik Revolution in 1917. The third question, what is surplus value? What is surplus value in Marxian analysis? What is the similarity or difference between the rate of profit in the classical analysis and the rate of surplus value in Marxian analysis? Let us go back again to slides to find out the answer of this question. Now, as I explained to you earlier in this meeting, that Karl Marx asserted, I'm just reading this slide now, Karl Marx asserted that capital is not merely an indirect or stored labor, but in fact a factor that was built through the time at the cost of laborers. The value of output produced at any time was the property of the laborers who produced it. Capitalists, through exploitation, through exploitation, gave laborers only part of the value of the output in terms of subsistence wages. So as I said, the capitalist is going to produce an amount of the commodity. The value of this output is such, say Y. Now subsistence wages, W. Okay? Or as I used in letters in this presentation, the value of output is V. This is the value of output. Wages, which are given to workers, which is the sum of subsistence wages given to all labor, is W. The difference between V and the W, which V minus W, is the surplus value, which we indicate as S. Now, this is to be matched by our analysis, our economic analysis in general. When we say that output Y minus the wages given to the workers will give us the profits plus rent plus interest taken by other factors production. But Karl Marx ignored rent here, ignored interest. He took the difference between the value of output and wages in one bulk. That's the surplus value. The surplus value is the value taken out of output and should have been given to the workers, because they are the real producers, whether in terms of direct labor or indirect labor. Now, the rate of the surplus value may be compared, the rate of surplus value may be compared by the rate of profit. Now, let us review this slide. V, which is the value of output, equal wages plus surplus value. Now, when we divide S by W, S over W, this Marx called rate of exploitation. Rate of exploitation. S divided by W is the rate of exploitation. Notice that if the surplus value is equal to all wages paid to labor, this rate of exploitation will be equal 1. Whenever S is smaller than W, the rate of exploitation will be less than 1, which means that there is less exploitation. I mean, the smaller S over W, and this will only be achieved by smaller S, because W is the sum of subsistence wages, which we may say constant. So the smaller the value of S will be the smaller the rate of exploitation, which means that capitalists are not exploiting much of their working class. But whenever the rate of exploitation is greater than 1, I mean the capitalists after that in other slides, as we know, will try to pressurize wages. How? How to pressurize wages? By employing women, where women in that time were taking much less wage than men, and employing children. Children still taking much less wages than women in that time of the 19th century. So the capitalists will try to pressurize the labor and take more of surplus value by increasing their output, but this will cause later on a big crisis, as Marx explained. Now, rate of profit in Marxian analysis will be obtained, as you see in the slide, by dividing S by W plus C small c dash. Now, the denominator in this equation is W plus C dash. W wages. What is small c dash? It is the capital depreciation, the amount used in capital in production. Capitalists are using machineries and other equipment. But as we know from our study in economics, that in every period, for every amount of production, there is an amount of capital which is depreciating, used in production. Amount of capital which is depreciating because it is used in production. Machineries, say, will be depreciating totally and become scrap, say, in 10 years. So every year, 10% is depreciating. So the amount of capital which is depreciating, which is consumed in production, is called small c dash. The rate of profit is the surplus value, as we have explained it, which is the difference between the total value of output minus wages, S divided by W, wages plus the capital depreciation. Now, as you have seen you see in the equation, the capital depreciation is function of capital, where we refer to capital as K, capital K. C dash is function of K. So capital accumulation depends on savings of the capitalist and technology. Capital accumulation depends on savings of capitalists and technology, progress, technological progress. Technology, by its nature, in that period of time and even later on, as Marx asserted, is capital intensive. Technology is capital intensive, but Marx explained that by saying that the capitalists deliberately seek capital intensive technology in order to pressurize the working class more and more, to force them to take the minimum wage level. I mean, even if economic progress, as John Stuart Mill said, would allow the wage rate to rise gradually, but the capitalists will try to keep the wage rate at the minimum possible level, which is the subsistence wage level. How? By employing capital intensive technology. Because when employing capital intensive technology, they are replacing workers and by capital. Capital is used instead of labor in production. Capital is used in production and instead of labor. I mean, the labor will be needed less through time. Why? Because we are using capital intensive technology. Now back to our question, which we have posed, that what surplus value in Marxian analysis? You just simply, briefly, would say that surplus value is the difference between the value of output and wages paid to the workers, where wage rate is fixed at subsistence wage level. What is the similarity or difference between the rate of profit in the classical analysis and the rate of surplus value in Marxian analysis? Rate of profit in classical analysis would measure the profits achieved by capitalists divided by the value of capital. When you would like to get the rate of profit, you are dividing profits which you obtained by the value of capital. If you would like to measure the rate of profit per units of capital, if you would like to measure the rate of profit in another way, as we know, you can divide the amount of profit by the total costs of production, which we use in our analysis. The classical economists were estimating the rate of profit, of course, by knowing profits which they have achieved by their total costs or by the cost of capital. I mean, the amount of capital used in production. Both ways can measure to us the rate of profit, which is different than the rate of surplus value, which, as I said, the rate of surplus value would give us the surplus value which is not equal to the profit. as we have explained before, to take the surplus value and divide it by wages, which is an amount of expenditure plus capital depreciation. Again, notice that Karl Marx had not taken in the costs. I mean, if we are comparing this with the rate of profit obtained by dividing profits by total costs, which we use in our modern economic analysis. Now, the Marx talked about cost of labor, cost of capital, which is the C dash, okay? But he did not mention the land rent. That was something observed in Marxian analysis, that he almost ignored the reference to the cost of land and seems to have considered land as just part of capital. Same defect or default in analysis was transferred after that when Marxism was applied in Russia and in the development plans, that they were treating land as if it is part of capital, although this is not true. Land is another factor of production. وكمان احنا ما نقدرش ان احنا نعتبر land كمان. We cannot
يا جماعة الدكتور عمل ميتنج تاني، يعني لو حد عايز يعني. الدكتور عمل ميتنج تاني وطلع من ده خالص.
جماعة محدش يعرف دكتور في أنه واحد. أنا عمالة أخش وأطلع من كذا واحد، مش لاقية حاجة.